Before we get into today's story, I want to ask you something.
Yeah.
And I want you to really sit with this question. If someone does the right thing high, but for the wrong reasons, Pite, are they still right? Most of us would say yes. Of course, the outcome is what matters. But what if the right thing causes more damage than the original hurt? What if the person fighting for justice is also, just a little bit, the reason things got broken in the first place? I'm not saying that to be harsh. I'm saying it because today's story made me think about that a lot. This is a story about a mother who was genuinely hurt, who was lied to, who was left alone on her birthday. And she had every right to feel what she felt. But it's also a story about how love, real love, can sometimes look a lot like control, and how we don't always see that in ourselves until it's almost too late. So before you decide who's right and who's wrong, Kai, just wait. Let the whole story breathe first, because I promise you, by the end, you might surprise yourself. All right, let's get into it.
Her name is Dorothy Callahan, but nobody, and I mean nobody, has ever called her that. To everyone who matters, she's just Dot. Dot is 72 years old. She lives in a 2-bedroom house in Portland, Oregon. The kind of neighborhood where people still wave to each other from their driveways, where the mailman knows your name, where the coffee shop on the corner remembers your order without you having to say a word. She retired 4 years ago after spending 31 years as a social worker for Multnomah County, 3 decades of helping other families untangle their messes. The irony of that is not lost on her now. Her husband Frank passed away 6 years ago. Heart failure, quick and quiet, which is exactly how Frank lived his whole life. He was the steady one, the calm one, the one who could walk into any room and make everyone feel like things were going to be okay. Dot misses him every single day. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way she talks about much, just in the small moments. The second cup of coffee she still makes out of habit, the way she still sets 2 placemats on the kitchen table sometimes before catching herself, the side of the bed she refuses to sleep on, even after 6 years. Frank used to say she was the engine of the family. He meant it as a compliment. Dot isn't so sure anymore. Their son Kevin is 44 years old. He's a regional director for a commercial real estate firm based in Seattle. Smart, driven, successful. All the things Frank used to brag about at the dinner table. Kevin calls his mother every Sunday, usually around noon, usually for about 12 minutes. Dot has never said anything about the 12 minutes, but she counts them every time. She tells herself it's enough, that he's busy, that this is just how adult children are these days. She's been telling herself that for about 7 years now, and somewhere deep down, in a place she doesn't like to visit, she knows that's not the whole truth. Kevin was not an easy child to raise, not because he was difficult, but because Dot loved him in a way that left very little room for error. She had miscarried twice before Kevin came along, 2 pregnancies, 2 losses, 2 tiny heartbreaks she packed away and never fully unpacked. By the time Kevin was born, he wasn't just her son. He was her proof that things could still go right. And that kind of love, the desperate kind, the relieved kind, it comes with a weight the child doesn't ask to carry. Dot planned everything, which school he'd attend, which sports were worth his time, which friends were good influences, and which ones she quietly discouraged. She wasn't mean about it. She never yelled. She never threatened. She just had a way of making her preferences feel like facts. Kevin wanted to study art in college. He was good at it too. His sketchbooks were everywhere. The kitchen table, the back seat of the car, the edge of the bathtub. Frank used to flip through them with this quiet pride on his face. Dot enrolled him in a business prep summer program the summer before his senior year of high school. She told him it would keep his options open. She told herself the same thing. Kevin never mentioned art school again after that. He got a full scholarship to the University of Oregon, studied business administration, graduated with honors, got recruited before he even finished his final semester. Dot was so proud she cried at graduation. Frank squeezed her hand and whispered, he did it, and he had. Kevin had done everything right, everything Dot had pointed him toward. She never once asked herself whether those were the same thing. There were other moments too. Small ones that she's mostly forgotten. The girlfriend Kevin had at 19 that Dot didn't approve of. A girl named Trish, sweet but directionless, Dot had said. Within 3 months of Dot's quiet campaign of subtle comments and loaded silences, Kevin and Trish had broken up. Kevin never brought another girlfriend home for 2 years after that. The apartment he wanted to rent at 24, too far from home, Dot had said. Too expensive for what it was. She'd found him something closer, negotiated the lease herself, even helped him decorate. Kevin lived there for 18 months before transferring to Seattle without much warning. Dot had been hurt by that. She'd never connected the dots. Kevin met Megan at a work conference in Portland. She was presenting a paper on urban development financing. Kevin was in the back row, pretending to take notes. He told Frank about her first, not Dot. Frank never mentioned that detail to his wife, but he remembered it. And in the last year of his life, his heart was already quietly failing. He thought about it more than once. Kevin and Megan dated for 2 years before he proposed. They were good years. Megan was grounded in a way that steadied Kevin. She laughed easily. She asked good questions. She had a mother named Sandra who was warm and a little loud and completely uninterested in anyone else's business. The opposite of the mothers Kevin had grown up watching Dot interact with at church and neighborhood gatherings. Kevin loved that about her family. The ease of it, the lack of weight. He proposed on a Tuesday evening on the rooftop of a restaurant in Seattle. No big production, just the two of them and a ring he'd picked out himself without asking anyone's opinion. That last part mattered to him more than he ever said out loud. When he called Dot to tell her, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "Well, I suppose I should meet her properly then. Not, 'I'm so happy for you.' Not, 'Tell me everything.' Just, 'I suppose I should meet her properly.'" Kevin heard everything in that pause, in that word, suppose. He didn't say anything about it. He'd spent a lifetime not saying anything about it. The first dinner between Dot and Megan was at Dot's house. Pot roast, green beans, the good dishes. Dot had cleaned the house twice that week. Megan brought flowers and a bottle of Oregon Pinot Noir and complimented Dot's garden on the way in. Dot thanked her politely and then spent most of dinner asking Kevin questions. Not Megan. Kevin, how's the new project going? Are you sleeping enough? Did you ever call that doctor about your knee? Megan smiled through all of it. Kevin watched his mother and his fiancée across the dinner table and felt something he couldn't quite name. It sat in his chest like a stone. He refilled everyone's wine and changed the subject. That was 7 years ago. Not much has changed since then, except everything has. The wedding was held in September. A vineyard outside Portland. 70 guests. String lights and rented wooden chairs, and a cake with fresh figs that Megan had spent 3 months deciding on. It was beautiful. Dot wore a pale blue dress she'd bought in July and returned twice before finally keeping it. She sat in the front row and watched her son marry a woman she still didn't fully know. And she smiled through all of it, because that's what you do. What Dot remembered most about that day wasn't the ceremony. It wasn't the first dance or the toasts or the moment Kevin cried a little when he saw Megan walk down the aisle. What she remembered was the receiving line afterward. Sandra, Megan's mother, stood beside Dot for about 20 minutes as guests filed through. Sandra was the kind of woman who touched your arm when she talked to you, who laughed at her own jokes before she finished telling them, who made strangers feel like old friends inside of 30 seconds. Guest after guest lit up when they reached Sandra. Dot stood 18 inches away and shook hands and said, "Thank you for coming," and meant it. But she felt it, that invisible distance. The way warmth can exist right next to you and still not reach you. She told herself it didn't matter. She told herself a lot of things that day. The one moment that stayed with her, the one she's turned over in her mind more times than she'd ever admit, happened near the end of the evening. She was standing by the bar, alone for a minute, watching Kevin and Megan on the dance floor. Lily, 8 years old at the time, already Megan's niece from her brother's side, already attached to Kevin like a small, determined barnacle, had climbed into Kevin's arms mid-song. Kevin was laughing. Megan had her head on his shoulder. Lily had both arms wrapped around Kevin's neck, and for just a second, Kevin looked up. He looked right at Dot. He smiled. It was a real smile, a full one. Dot smiled back. But she also felt something shift inside her chest, something small and quiet and hard to name, like a door closing. Not slamming, just closing. She finished her wine and went to find someone to talk to. Here is something that rarely gets said in stories like this one. Megan tried. She really did. The first Thanksgiving after the wedding, Megan called Dot 3 weeks in advance and asked if she wanted to host. Said she and Kevin would drive down, bring everything, do all the cooking. Dot just had to sit at her own table. Dot says that she didn't want to make a fuss. They ordered takeout from a restaurant in Seattle instead. Dot told Margaret, her closest friend, that Megan hadn't invited her for Thanksgiving. She didn't remember it that way. She genuinely didn't. The following spring, Megan found a watercolor class at a community center in Portland. Thursday evenings, beginner-friendly, the instructor was apparently wonderful. She called Dot and mentioned it, casually. Said she'd seen it and thought of her. Said she'd be happy to sign them both up if Dot was interested. Dot said she'd think about it. She never called back. Megan didn't bring it up again. That was the thing about Megan. She was perceptive enough to know when a door was only halfway open, and she'd grown up in a family where you didn't push doors that weren't fully open. So she stopped pushing. That didn't mean she stopped caring. She asked Kevin about Dot regularly, made sure they called on Sundays, reminded him about her birthday, her doctor appointments, the anniversary of Frank's passing. Kevin sometimes forgot those things on his own. Megan never told Dot that. She figured some things were better left unsaid. She was probably right. But here's the part that gets complicated. Dot interpreted Megan stepping back as confirmation of what she'd always suspected. That Megan didn't really want her around, that she was too different, too much, too old-fashioned for this polished Seattle life Kevin had built. She never once considered that maybe Megan had stepped back because Dot had never quite stepped forward. That maybe this distance between them had been built from both sides, brick by brick. One unanswered phone call at a time, one Sunday dinner declined, one watercolor class left unreturned. Neither of them ever said any of this out loud. Kevin knew. He saw it clearly from where he stood, right in the middle of it. He just didn't know what to do with what he saw. So he did what he'd always done. He refilled everyone's wine and changed the subject. The years have a way of making distance feel normal. That's the dangerous part. It doesn't happen all at once. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to drift. It's slower than that, quieter than that. It's a Sunday call that goes from 40 minutes to 20, then from 20 to 12. Then 12 becomes the new normal, and nobody says anything because what is there to say exactly? It's a Christmas that gets spent in Seattle because Megan's brother is in town. Then another Christmas in Seattle because the drive is hard in winter. Then, somewhere along the way, Portland stops being where Kevin spends Christmas, and nobody officially decided that. It just became true. Dot noticed all of it. She just didn't say anything. Because saying something meant admitting it was happening, and admitting it was happening meant sitting with a pain she didn't have the tools to sit with. So she kept the house clean. She kept her garden going. She had coffee with Margaret on Tuesdays. She volunteered at the library 2 afternoons a week. Not as a librarian, just helping with the reading program for kids, which she was good at and which gave her somewhere to be. From the outside, Dot Callahan looked like a woman who was doing just fine. From the inside, she was counting 12-minute phone calls. There were moments she came close to saying something real. Once, about 4 years ago, Kevin called on a Sunday, and she could tell he was distracted. She could hear Megan in the background. Something about dinner, something about traffic. She'd started to say, "Kevin, can I ask you something?" He said, "Sure, Mom, what's up?" And she lost her nerve. She said, "Did you ever get that gutter fixed? I know you mentioned it was leaking." He said the gutter was fine. They'd talked for 9 minutes that week. After she hung up, she sat in Frank's old armchair for a long time. She thought about what she'd actually wanted to ask. "Do you still need me? Am I still part of your life? Do you know that I'm lonely in a way I don't know how to say?" She never found the words. Or maybe she found them and just couldn't make herself say them out loud. Because asking those questions meant being vulnerable in a way Dot Callahan had never learned how to be. Her whole life she'd been the one with the answers, the one with the plan, the one who held things together, needing something from someone else. Really needing it, saying it plainly, felt like a kind of falling she didn't know how to survive. So she kept quiet, and the distance kept growing, and both of them let it. The morning of her birthday, Dot woke up at 6. Same as always. She made coffee, dark roast, no sugar, the same brand she'd been buying for 30 years. She took it out to the back porch and sat in the chair that gets the morning light first. The garden was doing well. The roses she'd planted along the fence were coming in full this year. Frank had always said she had a gift for growing things. She thought about that for a while. Then she thought about the fact that it was her birthday. 72 years old. She didn't feel 72. She wasn't sure what 72 was supposed to feel like. Her knees knew. Her lower back definitely knew. But the rest of her, the part that still got annoyed at bad drivers and still cried at certain songs and still had opinions about everything, that part felt about the same as it always had. She went inside and called Kevin at 9. She wasn't going to wait for him to call first. She'd done that before. Waited. Watched the phone. Told herself he'd remember. One year he called at 8 p.m. That was the year she decided she'd always call first. He picked up on the third ring. "Hey, Mom." His voice was warm enough. A little distracted. She could hear traffic in the background. He was probably already on his way somewhere. "Good morning, sweetheart. Just calling to say hello." She never said just calling because it's my birthday. She'd learned that asking directly for things created a kind of obligation that felt hollow when fulfilled. She wanted him to remember on his own. He didn't. They talked for a few minutes. His work, her garden, the roses. He said, "That was great, Mom. Really great." Then she said it. "I was thinking maybe we could have dinner tonight. Just the two of us. Or the three of us if Megan wants to come. It's been a while." A pause. "Not long. Just long enough. Tonight's actually tough, Mom. There's a thing with Megan's family. Her mom's in town." "Oh." Dot kept her voice even. "Of course. That's fine. We'll do something soon, though. Maybe next weekend." "Shh. Sure. Okay. Well, talk soon, Mom. Talk soon." She sat with the phone in her hand for a moment after he hung up. The coffee had gone cold. She didn't get up to reheat it. She just sat there in Frank's chair and looked at the roses through the window. And something that had been quietly building for 7 years, maybe longer, maybe since a Tuesday evenings when she'd stood by a bar at a vineyard and watched it close softly, finally reached a point it couldn't go past. She wasn't angry yet. She was something quieter than angry. She was done waiting. Dot sat in that chair for a long time. Then she got up. She washed her coffee cup, dried it, put it back in the cabinet exactly where it belonged, and she made a decision. She was not going to spend her birthday waiting by the phone. She was not going to eat leftover soup and watch television and tell herself it was fine. It was not fine. But she wasn't ready to say that out loud yet. Not even to herself. She called Margaret. Margaret picked up on the first ring, which was typical. Margaret had owned the same flip phone for 11 years and kept it in her shirt pocket at all times like a doctor on call. "It's my birthday," Dot said. "Come to dinner with me tonight." "I know it's your birthday," Margaret said. "I've known you for 40 years. Where do you want to go?" That was the thing about Margaret. No fuss, no questions. Just, where do you want to go? Dot Thought for a moment. Hendrix. A pause on Margaret's end. Dot. Hendrix is expensive. I know. Like, very expensive. Margaret. Okay. What time? Hendrix was the kind of restaurant that had white tablecloths and a wine list the size of a small novel and servers who introduced themselves by name and meant it. Frank had taken her there. Twice. Once for their 25th anniversary. Once for no reason at all, on a random Wednesday in October, just because he'd had a good week and wanted to share it with her. That second time was the one she remembered more. She put on a dress she hadn't worn in 2 years. Dark green, simple. Frank had liked her in green. She did her hair, put on the pearl earrings she saved for good occasions, and then rarely decided things were good enough occasions. Tonight was a good enough occasion. She looked at herself in the mirror for a moment. 72. Still here. Still standing. She picked up her purse and walked out the door. Margaret was already at the bar when Dot arrived. She had her reading glasses on and was studying the cocktail menu like it was a legal document. They have a lavender martini, she said by way of greeting. I don't know what that means, but I'm having one. Dot laughed. The first real laugh of the day. They got a table by the window. The restaurant was warm and low-lit and smelled like wood smoke and garlic. A piano player in the corner was working through something slow and pretty that Dot almost recognized. They ordered wine. They looked at the menu. Margaret talked about her granddaughter's soccer tournament and a book she'd abandoned halfway through and a neighbor who'd started parking in front of her mailbox. Dot let herself relax into it. This is enough, she thought. This is a good birthday. She almost believed it. Then Margaret stopped talking mid-sentence. Dot looked up. Margaret was looking past her, toward the back of the restaurant. Her expression had gone carefully neutral in the way it only did when she was trying not to react to something. Dot, she said quietly, don't turn around quickly, which of course meant Dot turned around. Kevin was at a table in the back. He was with Megan, and Sandra, and Lily. 15 now, taller than Dot remembered, her hair up. There were balloons, small ones, silver and white, tied to the back of Megan's chair. There was a cake on a separate stand near the table. The server was lighting the candles. Kevin was smiling. The full smile. The real one. The same one he'd given Dot through the string lights at his wedding while holding Lily and looking like he had everything he needed. Dot turned back around. She picked up her wine glass, put it down without drinking. He said there was a thing with Megan's family, she said. Her voice came out very steady. She was a little surprised by that. I know, Margaret said. He didn't say it was Megan's birthday. I know. He didn't say, Mom, it's her birthday and I want to do something special. Can we celebrate you another night? I know, Margaret said again, softer this time. Dot was quiet for a moment. She looked down at the tablecloth, white linen, perfectly pressed. Here's what she did not do. She did not cry. She did not get up and walk over there. She did not call Kevin's cell phone and let him hear her voice in a crowded restaurant and watch him realize. She sat very still, and she thought about 7 years of Sunday calls getting shorter. 7 years of next weekends that never quite arrived. 7 years of being managed at a careful, comfortable distance by a son who loved her, and also, she could see it now, clearly, for the first time, was a little afraid of her. And she thought about something else too, something uncomfortable. She thought about a watercolor class on Thursday evenings that she'd never called back about. A Thanksgiving she'd declined without really saying why. A dinner table where she'd asked Kevin about his gutter and said nothing real. She thought about all the doors she'd left only halfway open. And she wondered, just for a moment, just quietly, how much of this distance she had built herself. The server came to take their order. Dot ordered the salmon. She smiled at the server and said thank you, and meant it. Then she turned back to Margaret. I need to think, she said. Margaret nodded. Take your time, she said. I'm not going anywhere. And that small plain sentence from a woman who'd known her for 40 years was the thing that finally made Dot's eyes go wet. Not Kevin's table in the back. Not the balloons. Not the cake with the candles. Just, I'm not going anywhere. She pressed her fingers to the corner of her eye and looked out the window at the street. Okay, she said quietly. Okay. I need to stop here for a second, because I've been sitting with this story for a while now. And there's something I can't stop thinking about. When I first heard about Dot, a 72-year-old woman, alone on her birthday, watching her son celebrate his wife's birthday at the same restaurant, I felt it. I really felt it. I think most of us did, because that image is painful. A mother, alone, watching her family through the distance she didn't choose. Or did she? That's the question I keep coming back to. Because here's what I noticed. Kevin didn't lie to his mother, not exactly. He said there was a thing with Megan's family, which was true. He just didn't say what the thing was, or that it was happening at the same restaurant, or that it was Megan's birthday day. He left things out, which is its own kind of dishonesty. I'm not excusing that, but I've been thinking about why he left things out, and I really think, it's because Kevin has spent his whole life managing information around his mother, deciding what to say and what to leave out, what will start something and what won't. He learned that somewhere. Kids don't come into the world knowing how to do that. They learn it. And here's the other thing I can't stop thinking about. Megan called about a watercolor class once. Just mentioned it. Said she'd thought of Dot and wondered if she'd like to go together. Dot never called back. A Thanksgiving invitation. Declined. Dinner table conversations that stayed on the surface because Dot kept them there. Now, does any of that justify Kevin leaving his mother alone on her birthday without a real explanation? No, it doesn't. But I think if we're being honest, really honest, this isn't a story about a son who forgot his mother. This is a story about two people who love each other and have no idea how to say so. And a lot of years of small moments that added up to a very large distance. So before we get to what Dot does next, and she does do something, she makes a decision that night that changes things. I just want you to sit with that. Think about the relationships in your own life, the calls that got shorter, the invitations that went unanswered, the things you meant to say and didn't. Sometimes the distance we feel most is the distance we helped create. Okay, let's keep going. Dot and Margaret stayed through dessert. They did not talk about Kevin again that night. Margaret understood, the way she always did, that some things need to be put down for a few hours before they can be picked back up properly. So they talked about other things. Margaret's lavender martini, which she described as drinking a fancy candle, but in a good way. The piano player who had moved on to something that sounded like old Sinatra. The couple 2 tables over who were clearly on a first date and doing okay with it. Normal things. Warm things. Dot was grateful for every minute of it. The drive home was quiet. Margaret dropped her at the curb and squeezed her hand before she got out. Call me tomorrow, Margaret said. I will. And Dot. She turned. Happy birthday. You're still the sharpest person I know. Don't let tonight make you forget that. Dot nodded. She went inside. The house was quiet in the way that houses get quiet at night when you've lived alone in them long enough. Not an empty quiet, just a settled one. The refrigerator hum, the pipes, the particular creak of the floorboard outside the bathroom that had been there since 2009 and that she'd stopped meaning to fix somewhere around 2011. She made chamomile tea. She took it to the living room and sat in Frank's chair. She didn't turn on the television. She just sat. On the side table next to Frank's chair, there was a framed photo she'd put there years ago and stopped, really seeing the way you stop seeing things that are always there. Frank and Kevin. Kevin was maybe 9 or 10. They were at the coast somewhere. She thought it was Cannon Beach, but she wasn't sure anymore. Both of them squinting into the sun. Frank had his hand on the back of Kevin's neck in that easy way he had. Kevin was laughing at something. She picked up the frame, looked at it properly for the first time in a long time. Frank, she thought. What did you see that I didn't? She knew he'd seen something. She'd known it for years in that vague way you know things you don't want to examine directly. The sketchbook he'd bought Kevin that she'd only found out about after Frank passed, tucked in the back of Frank's closet in a shoebox, with a note in Frank's handwriting that said, "Keep going." Kevin had come to clean out the closet and found it, and gone very quiet for a long time. He hadn't said anything to Dot about it. She'd pretended not to notice. But she had noticed, and tonight, sitting with chamomile tea and a photo and 72 years of choices, both made and avoided, she let herself think about what that shoebox meant. Frank had seen something in their son that needed protecting. Not from the world, from her. That thought landed hard. She sat with it anyway, because she was tired of putting hard things down before she'd really held them. The tea went cold. She didn't move. Outside the window, the neighborhood was quiet. A dog somewhere. A car passing slow. The roses she couldn't see in the dark, but knew were there. She thought about the watercolor class. Thursday evenings. Beginner friendly. She thought about why she hadn't called back. The honest answer, the one she hadn't let herself say before tonight, was that calling back would have meant letting Megan in. Really in. And letting Megan in meant admitting that Kevin had built a life that had room for Megan, in a way it didn't quite have room for Dot anymore. And that felt like losing. She'd spent her whole life making sure she didn't lose things. People. Control. The upper hand in situations she was afraid of. And in doing that, in holding on so carefully to everything, she had somehow held Kevin at the exact distance she'd been so afraid of. She closed her eyes. Frank, she thought again. I think I finally see it. A little late, but I see it. She put the photo back on the side table, finished the cold tea, and went to bed. She slept better than she expected. Not well, but better than expected. She was up at 6 again. Coffee, back porch. The roses in the early light. She sat there for almost an hour before she picked up her phone. She didn't call Kevin. She texted him. Just 4 words. Can we talk today? Not a question mark. She'd thought about that. A question mark made it easy to say no, or not yet. Or let me check with Megan. Can we talk today? A statement that expected an answer. She put the phone face down on the porch railing and went inside to make breakfast. Eggs, toast, the same breakfast she'd made almost every morning for 50 years. Frank used to say she made the best scrambled eggs he'd ever had. And she used to tell him that was because she used butter instead of cooking spray, and he used to act surprised every single time, like she hadn't told him that 100 times before. She was halfway through her eggs when the phone buzzed. Yeah. I can come by this afternoon, around 2. No. Are you okay? No, what's this about? No, is everything all right, Mom? Just. Around 2. He knew. Of course he knew. She typed back, okay, and finished her breakfast. She spent the morning doing ordinary things. Watered the garden. Folded laundry. Called Margaret and told her Kevin was coming at 2. Margaret said good and asked if she wanted company beforehand, and Dot said no, I need to think, and Margaret said okay and didn't push. At 11, she sat down at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and a pen. She didn't write anything for a long time. Then she wrote, what do I actually want from this conversation? She stared at that line. Then she wrote 3 things underneath it. For him to understand what last night felt like. For him to know I see my part in this. For us to figure out if there's still something worth fixing. She folded the paper and put it in her cardigan pocket. Not to read from, just to have. Kevin arrived at 2:07. She heard his car in the driveway. Heard him sit there for almost 2 minutes before he got out. She'd seen him do that before. Sit in the car and gather himself before walking into something difficult. Frank used to do the same thing. She opened the door before he could knock. He looked tired. He was in jeans and a gray pullover, not his work clothes, which meant he'd driven down this morning. 2.5 hours from Seattle, specifically for this. That meant something. She didn't know exactly what yet. Hi, Mom. Come in, she said. I made coffee. They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where she'd helped him with homework, where he'd told her, and Frank had gotten the scholarship, where Frank had sat us on a Tuesday morning and said his chest felt strange, and Dot had called 911, and they never sat at that table the same way again. Layers in furniture, layers in rooms. Kevin wrapped both hands around his mug. He didn't say anything right away. Neither did she. The clock on the wall moved through about 30 seconds. Then Kevin said, "I know you saw us last night." Not, "I'm sorry," not, "let me explain," just, "I know you saw us." "Yes," Dot said. "I did." Another silence. "I should have told you it was Megan's birthday," he said. "I should have said it straight. I didn't know how to say it without it becoming a whole thing." Dot looked at her son across the table, 44 years old, tired eyes, hands around a coffee mug. "A whole thing," she repeated quietly. "Mom, no." She kept her voice even. "I want to understand that. What did you think was going to happen if you told me the truth?" Kevin opened his mouth, closed it, looked down at his mug. "I thought you'd be hurt," he said finally. "I am hurt." "I know, but Kevin." She leaned forward slightly. "I've been hurt before. I've handled hard things before. Did you really think I couldn't handle?" "My son telling me he wants to celebrate his wife's birthday." He looked up, and she saw something in his face then. Something complicated. Something that had been there a long time and hadn't had anywhere to go. "It's not just about last night," he said. "I know," she said. He stopped, started again. "Mom, it's been a long time, and I don't always know what's going to." He stopped again. Dot waited. This was new. Letting him find the words without finishing his sentences for him. It was harder than she expected. Kevin set his mug down. He looked at his mother, and then he said something he had said to Dr. Reeves many times, and never once said to her. "I love you, Mom. I want you to know that first. Whatever I say next, that part's not complicated." Dot nodded. Her throat was tight. "But I've spent my whole life not knowing how to be around you without feeling like I was going to get something wrong. And I know that's hard to hear. But it's true. The kitchen was very quiet. I used to think it was just me," Kevin said, "that I was too sensitive or too whatever. But I've been talking to someone for a few years now. A therapist." He watched her face when he said that. She kept it still. "And I started to understand that some of the ways I learned to manage things, to avoid conflict, to just redirect instead of saying what I actually meant. I learned those things at home. I learned them early." Dot felt something move through her chest. Not anger. Something that hurt more than anger. "I'm not saying that to blame you," Kevin said quickly. "I'm saying it because I think it's true. And I think you deserve the truth. Same way I deserved it last night and didn't give it to you." He picked up his mug again, put it down without drinking. "Megan tried," he said quietly. "She really did, in the beginning. She talked about you all the time. She wanted to know you. She asked me once, 'Why does your mom never ask me anything?' And I didn't know what to say." Dot looked at the table. "I didn't know what to say because I'd stopped noticing it," Kevin said. "It just felt normal to me. It took me a long time to understand that normal isn't the same as okay." The clock moved through another 30 seconds. Dot had her hands flat on the table in front of her. She was thinking about a dinner table 7 years ago. Green beans and good dishes, and a young woman who had brought flowers and wine and complimented her garden. And a woman who had spent that whole dinner asking Kevin about his gutter. "I owe Megan an apology," Dot said. Kevin looked up. She hadn't planned to say that first. But there it was. "I wasn't fair to her," Dot said. "I decided what she was before I knew her. And then I looked for evidence that I was right and ignored everything else." Kevin was quiet. She stopped. Started again. "I found the sketchbook. After your father passed. The one he bought you." Something shifted in Kevin's face. "He never said anything to me about it," Dot said. "But I think I knew why he bought it. I think I knew, and I didn't let myself think about it." "Mom, I took that from you," she said. "The art. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was keeping your options open. But I was keeping my options open, my idea of what your life should look like. Her voice stayed steady. She'd promised herself it would stay steady. I don't know how to undo that, she said. I don't know if you can, but I think you deserve to hear me say it. Kevin had his eyes down. When he looked up, they were wet, not crying, just wet. Why didn't you and Dad ever talk about this stuff? He said. Not accusing, just asking. Because your father kept the peace, Dot said, and I let him. Because it was easier than being wrong. She looked at her son. I've spent my whole life being afraid of being wrong, Kevin. And it turns out that's its own kind of wrong. The kitchen held them both for a moment. Outside, a bird landed in the rose garden and then left again. I still need you to do better, Dot said finally. Her voice was quieter now, but still clear. Last night wasn't okay. Leaving me out without an explanation, that's not okay. Whatever history we have, I'm still your mother, and I still deserve honesty. I know, Kevin said. And I need you to not manage me. I need you to talk to me like I can handle things. Because I can. I know, he said again. Can you do that? He looked at her for a long moment. I can try, he said. I think I need you to. I need some things to be different too. I need to feel like I can say no sometimes without it becoming a whole thing, Dot said, a beat. Then Kevin almost smiled. Yeah, he said, without it becoming a whole thing. Dot looked at her son. She thought about 44 years. About a little boy who drew in sketchbooks, and a teenager who never argued back, and a man who sat in his car for 2 minutes before walking into difficult conversations. She thought about everything she'd meant to give him, and everything she hadn't realized she was taking. Okay, she said. Just that, okay. Kevin didn't leave at 3 or 4. He stayed for dinner, not because Dot asked. She hadn't planned to ask. She'd assumed he'd say what needed saying and drive back to Seattle before dark. But after the kitchen went quiet and they'd both sat with everything that had just been said, Kevin looked up and asked if she had anything for dinner. Just like that. Do you have anything for dinner? Like he was 17 again and coming home from school. She had chicken in the refrigerator, vegetables, the makings of something simple. I can make soup, she said. Okay, he said. So she made soup. And Kevin sat at the kitchen table while she did. Not on his phone, not checking emails. Just sitting there the way he used to sit when he was small. And the kitchen was the center of everything. And being near his mother while she cooked was just a thing that happened without anyone deciding it. They didn't talk about the big things anymore. They'd said the big things. They needed to breathe now. So they talked about small things, the roses. Kevin asked how she kept the aphids off, and she told him about the dish soap trick Frank had taught her, and Kevin said he hadn't known. Dad gardened, and Dot said he just read things and filed them away and produced them at useful moments, which was very frank. Kevin smiled at that. A real one. She put soup on the table and they ate. Outside the kitchen window, the light was going gold the way it does in Portland in the early evening when the weather is being kind. At one point, Kevin said, I forgot how good your soup is. Dot said, you always forget. Then you remember and then you forget again. Kevin said, that tracks. It wasn't much, but it was something. After dinner, Kevin helped clear the table. He washed. She dried. The way they used to when he was a teenager, and it was his turn, and he'd complain the whole time and do it anyway. He didn't complain now. He just washed. When the kitchen was clean, he stood by the door with his jacket in his hand. I should get on the road, he said. Beat the traffic. Drive safe, she said. He nodded. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He hugged her, not a quick hug. Not the kind with a pat on the back that's really just a countdown to stepping away. A real one. She felt him exhale into it. She held on for a moment longer than she usually let herself. Then they stepped back. I'll call this week, he said. Not just Sunday. She almost said, you don't have to. The old reflex. The one that said don't ask for too much, don't want too much, make yourself easy. She stopped it. I'd like that, she said instead. Kevin looked at her. Something in his face settled. Okay, he said. Good. She stood at the door and watched him back out of the driveway. He gave a small wave through the windshield. She raised her hand. Then his car turned the corner and was gone. She stood there for a moment in the open doorway. The evening air was cool and smelled like cut grass, and the neighbor's barbecue 2 houses down. She thought that was hard. And then she thought, I'm glad we did it. And then she went inside and called Margaret. 3 days later, Lily called. Not texted. Called. Dot picked up immediately because Lily always texted, and a phone call from a 15-year-old meant something was either wrong or important, and she wasn't sure which. Hi, Grandma Dot. Lily had called her Grandma Dot since she was 9. Not because she was Kevin's biological daughter. She wasn't. She was Megan's technically. But because somewhere along the way she just decided. And when Lily decided something, that was usually the end of the discussion. Hi, sweetheart, Dot said. Is everything okay? Yeah. Dad told me you guys talked, and I wanted to call. Dot settled into Frank's chair. That was kind of you. I was there that night, Lily said, at the restaurant. I saw you. Dot was quiet for a moment. I know you did, she said. I wanted to say something, but Mom said to let the adults handle it. A pause. Which I thought was kind of annoying, but whatever. Dot almost smiled. Your mom was right, she said. Maybe. Lily was quiet for a second. Can I say something? Of course. I think my Uncle Kevin really loves you. Like, actually. He talks about you. Did you know that? Dot hadn't known that. Or maybe she had and hadn't let herself believe it. He has this story he tells, Lily said, about when he was a kid and you drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to pick him up from a camping trip because he was homesick and too embarrassed to call himself, so he got his friend to call. And you never made him feel bad about it. You just showed up. Dot remembered that. Kevin was 12. February. The camp was up near Mount Hood. She'd driven 4 hours in the dark without telling Frank, because she didn't want a whole conversation about it. She just went. He tells that story like it's the best thing anyone ever did for him, Lily said. Dot pressed her fingers to her mouth for a moment. Thank you for telling me that, she said. I just thought you should know. Lily paused. Also, Aunt Megan wants to talk to you, but she's scared to call. I'm not supposed to tell you that either, Lily. I know. But it's true. After she hung up, Dot sat with that for a while. Megan was scared to call. She thought about that. A woman who had brought flowers to a dinner where nobody asked her a single question, who had offered a watercolor class and waited for a call that never came, who had spent 7 years being kept at arm's length by a woman who had decided before she knew her that she wasn't quite right, scared to call. Dot picked up her phone. She found Megan's number. She'd had it for 7 years and called it exactly 4 times. She pressed call before she could think about it too much. It rang twice. Dot? Megan's voice was careful. Surprised. Hi, Megan, Dot said. I was hoping we could talk. A beat. Yeah, Megan said. I'd really like that. They talked for 40 minutes. It wasn't easy. It wasn't the kind of conversation that wraps everything up neatly. There were moments of awkward silence in sentences that didn't quite land, and one moment where Megan said something honest that stung a little, and Dot had to take a breath before responding. But it was real. For the first time in 7 years, it was real. At the end, Megan said, I know this isn't fixed. I just want you to know I'm willing to try if you are. Dot said, I am. I should have been willing a long time ago. I'm sorry it took me this long. Megan was quiet for a second. Then she said, Kevin told me about the camping trip. The snowstorm. Lily. Dot said. Megan laughed. It was a good laugh. Warm and a little helpless the way laughs are when someone you love has just done something completely predictable. Yeah, Megan said. Lily. Dot found herself smiling. She's something else, Dot said. She really is, Megan said. She gets it from her grandmother. Dot held that for a moment. Thank you, she said quietly. They said goodbye. Dot sat in Frank's chair and looked at the photo on the side table. Frank and Kevin, Cannon Beach, the sun in their eyes. I'm trying, she told the photo. I know I'm slow, but I'm trying. The weeks after that were not magic. That's important to say. There was no single moment where everything clicked into place and the years of distance dissolved, and they all sat around a table, laughing like a family in a television commercial. It doesn't work that way. What happened was smaller than that, and in some ways harder. Kevin called on Wednesday that week, like he said he would. It wasn't a long call, about 20 minutes. They talked about nothing particularly important. His work, her garden, a book she was reading that he'd never heard of and pretended to be interested in, and she knew he was pretending and didn't mind. But it was Wednesday, not Sunday, and he called. The following weekend, Dot drove up to Seattle. Her idea. She'd offered and half expected Kevin to find a reason to delay it, and he hadn't. He'd said, "Yeah, come up. Stay the night if you want." She stayed 2 nights. The first evening was careful, everyone on their best behavior in a way that's exhausting but necessary. Megan made dinner, a good one. They sat at the dining table and talked about things that were safe and true and not particularly deep. After dinner, Lily commandeered the living room and made everyone watch a documentary about deep-sea creatures that she'd been apparently recommending to people for months, with limited success. It was strange and fascinating, and at one point, a fish appeared on screen that looked so improbable that Dot said, "That cannot be real." And Kevin said, "I know, right?" And Megan laughed, and just like that, the careful best behavior cracked open a little, and something more ordinary came through. Ordinary was what they needed. Not grand gestures. Just ordinary. The second day, Megan asked if Dot wanted to walk with her while Kevin was on a work call. Dot said yes. They walked around the neighborhood for 40 minutes. It was a nice neighborhood, tree-lined, the kind of street where people had put effort into their front gardens. Dot noticed a rose variety she hadn't seen before. Megan said, "Oh, those are Cinco de Mayo roses. They're apparently almost impossible to kill. I've been thinking about trying them." Dot said, "Frank always said the best plants are the ones that want to survive." Megan said, "I like that." They walked another block. Then Megan said, "I want you to know that I'm not trying to keep Kevin from you. I never was." Dot looked at the sidewalk. "I know," she said. "I think I made it easier to believe that than to look at my own part in things." Megan was quiet for a moment. "I probably could have tried harder too," she said. "After a while, I didn't know how to keep knocking on a door that didn't open." "That's fair," Dot said. They walked another half block. "I called about a watercolor class once," Megan said. "I remember," Dot said. "Is it too late for something like that?" Dot thought about it. "I don't think it has to be," she said. Megan nodded. They turned back toward the house. It wasn't a resolution. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped up in a bow. It was 2 women walking around a block and saying true things to each other for the first time, which was more than they'd managed in 7 years. So it counted. It counted for a lot. Dot drove home on Sunday morning. She left early, before the traffic built up on I-5. The drive back to Portland was 2.5 hours of gray sky and green hills, and the kind of quiet that comes after something significant has shifted. She thought about a lot of things on that drive. She thought about her father. The way you'd check his mood before you said anything. The way the whole house calibrated itself around one person's unpredictability. She'd spent her life trying not to be him, and in doing that had become something else she hadn't intended. Not volatile, not frightening, just immovable. A different kind of hard to be around. She thought about Frank. About all the things he'd smoothed over and absorbed and quietly worked around. About how she'd loved him for his steadiness without ever fully understanding the cost of it. He'd kept the peace so completely that neither of them had ever really learned to have the conversation that needed having. And Kevin had grown up watching that, learning that, carrying it into his own marriage until a therapist in Seattle helped him start to put it down. She thought about what it must have taken for Kevin to say what he'd said at that kitchen table. He'd been practicing that conversation for years, probably. She thought about Lily on the phone saying he tells that story, like it's the best thing anyone ever did for him. The camping trip, the snowstorm, the 4 hours in the dark. She'd done that without thinking, without calculating. Just her kid needed her and she went. That was in her too. That was also Dot. The controlling and the unconditional. The immovable and the woman who drove 4 hours in a February snowstorm without telling anyone. People are not one thing. She'd known that for 72 years, and still somehow kept being surprised by it. She stopped for gas outside Wilsonville. While the tank filled, she stood in the gray morning and looked at the hills and thought about what she wanted the next chapter to look like. Not a plan. She'd made enough plans. Just an intention. She wanted to be someone her son could tell the truth to. She wanted to be someone her daughter-in-law could call about a rose variety and mean it. She wanted to be someone Lily could commandeer for a documentary about impossible fish without it being an occasion. Just present. Without the weight of needing to be necessary. That was going to take practice. She knew that. She was 72 years old, and she was going to have to learn something she should have learned a long time ago. That was humbling. And also, strangely, okay, she got back in the car, pulled out of the gas station, pointed herself toward Portland. The sky was starting to lighten ahead of her, just slightly. But enough. 3 months later, Dot planted Cinco de Mayo roses along the back fence. Megan had sent her the name of a nursery in Portland that carried them. Just a text. Simple, with a little photo of the roses in bloom attached. Dot had screenshot the photo and set it as her phone wallpaper. She hadn't told anyone that. The Sunday calls were still happening, but they were longer now. Not always. Some weeks were still 12 minutes, and that was okay. Life was busy, and 12 minutes was sometimes all there was, and Dot had stopped counting them like evidence. But some weeks were 40 minutes, sometimes longer. Last month Kevin had called on a Thursday, just to tell her about something funny that had happened at work. No agenda, no occasion. Just, Mom, you're going to think this is ridiculous. And then 20 minutes of a story about a collapsed presentation and a very confused client, and Kevin laughing at himself in a way she hadn't heard in years. She'd laughed too. Really laughed. She'd thought about that call for days afterward. The watercolor class was still Megan's idea. Even if the class itself was different from the one she'd originally mentioned years ago. Dot had found this one herself. Tuesday evenings, a small studio near the river. The instructor was a woman named Barbara, who was 70 herself, and had the kind of energy that made you feel like you'd been doing it wrong your whole life, but in an encouraging way. Dot had signed up. She was terrible at it. Spectacularly terrible. Her first attempt at a landscape looked like something a very optimistic child had produced under difficult conditions. She photographed it and sent it to Lily. Lily sent back 7 laughing emojis, and then, Grandma Dot, that's actually kind of amazing. Dot sent back, it is absolutely not amazing, Lily. Lily sent, okay, but you're doing it, and that's the amazing part. Dot had read that message 3 times. Then she'd put her phone down and gone back to her terribles landscape. The relationship with Megan was not fixed. That was still true. There were still moments of awkwardness. Conversations that went slightly sideways. The particular difficulty of 2 people trying to relearn each other after years of polite distance. But there was effort now. Real effort from both sides. Megan called once a week. Usually short, usually practical. Dot might like. A recipe she thought might like, something Lily had said that was funny. A question about Frank's pot roast technique, which Dot had written out longhand and mailed because some things deserved to be on paper. Kevin had framed the handwritten recipe. Dot found that out from Lily, obviously. There was one Sunday in October when all 4 of them were on a video call at the same time. Kevin had set it up. Something about coordinating Thanksgiving, which this year, for the first time, was going to be in Portland. Dot's house, Megan cooking with her, Lily already campaigning for a specific pie that required an ingredient Dot had never heard of. It wasn't a perfect call. Someone's connection kept dropping. Lily kept going off camera to show them something in her room. Kevin and Megan talked over each other twice and apologized to each other in the easy, practiced way of people who've had that particular habit for years. Dot sat at her kitchen table and watched all of it through her phone screen. And she thought, this is my family, messy and imperfect and still figuring it out. But here, still here. After the call, she sat for a while in Frank's chair. She didn't talk to his photo this time. She just sat with the quiet, the good kind of quiet, the kind that comes not from being alone, but from having somewhere to belong. She'd forgotten that feeling for a while. She was glad to have it back, not all the way back. Not the way it was when Kevin was small and Frank was alive and the house was full of a life she hadn't yet learned to hold too tightly, but back enough to matter. Outside the kitchen window, the Cinco de Mayo roses were settling into the soil. They hadn't bloomed yet. It was too late in the season for that. But they were there, roots going down, taking hold, and that, Dot had decided, was enough for now. So that's Dot's story. And I've been sitting here thinking about how to wrap this up, because I don't want to tie a bow on it. I don't think it deserves a bow. I think it deserves something more honest than that. Here's what I keep coming back to. Dot wasn't the villain of this story. Neither was Kevin. Neither was Megan. They were just people, doing the best they could with the tools they had. And sometimes the tools we have aren't good enough. Sometimes we love people in ways that cost them something we didn't mean to take. Sometimes we protect ourselves from being hurt so carefully that we accidentally build the very distance we were afraid of. I think about Dot's father, the drinking, the unpredictability, the way a whole household learned to tiptoe around one person's mood. Dot spent her whole life trying not to be that, and she wasn't. But that fear, that need to control what came next, to make sure nothing could go wrong, it found its own way out. Quieter. More polished. Wrapped in love and good intentions. Still costly. I think about Kevin in the back row of a conference room, pretending to take notes. A man who'd spent his whole life learning to redirect and manage and smooth things over, who married a woman partly because being around her felt like breathing room, who loves his mother genuinely and completely, and also needed to get a little free of her. Both of those things true at the same time. I think about Megan bringing flowers to a dinner where nobody asked her a single question. Trying, stepping back, trying again. And I think about what it cost her to answer the phone when Dot called. Hey, to say, I'm willing to try if you are. That took something. I want to acknowledge that. And I think about Lily, 15 years old, and the only one in the whole story who just said the thing, called the person, told the truth without calculating the cost first. There's something in that worth noticing. Maybe the rest of us overthink it. Maybe sometimes you just pick up the phone. Now look, I know some of you listening to this have your own version of this story. Maybe you're the Dot in your family. The one who loves so hard it sometimes comes out sideways. Who holds on so tight that people have to pry a little to breathe. Maybe you're the Kevin. The one who learned early that it was easier to redirect than to say the hard thing. Who's been managing the emotional temperature of a room for so long you don't even notice you're doing it anymore. Maybe you're the Megan. The one who tried and stepped back and is still deciding whether to try again. Or maybe you're sitting somewhere in the middle of all three. Most of us are. Here's the thing, I believe, and I've believed this for a long time. It is never too late to try. Not never. Dot was 72 years old when she sat in Frank's chair and let herself hold a hard truth for the first time. 72. And something changed. Not everything. Not overnight. Not without cost. But something real changed. Because she let it. That's the part that stays with me. Not the birthday. Not the restaurant. Not even the kitchen table conversation. The part that stays with me is a 72-year-old woman sitting in her late husband's chair at midnight, looking at an old photograph and deciding. Slowly, quietly, without any audience. to stop being so afraid of being wrong. That's the whole story, really. Everything else is just what happened around it. I'd love to know what you think. Not about whether Dot was right or wrong. I think we're past that. But about your own life. Is there a door you've been leaving halfway open? Is there a watercolor class you never called back about? Is there someone you've been meaning to really talk to? Not manage, not redirect. Just talk to. If there is, maybe today's the day. You don't have to drive 4 hours in a snowstorm. Sometimes it's just a phone call. Thanks for listening, friends. I'll see you in the next one.